Since the Hamilton YMCA opened, it has been my home away from home, a place of refuge after a hard day, and a place where I visit with friends, as well as de-stress as I work out. I had no idea that the Lord would send a wonderful and handsome man to cross my path at the Y.
I was looking for a place close to my home in East Ridge to join and work out. I went by the BX about a mile from my house and picked up paperwork 3 or 4 different times. For some reason, I just never completed it. I heard about a good spin class at the Hamilton YMCA and started going there last November. Little did I know the Y had more for me than exercise.
It wasn't unusual for my good friend and spin class instructor Joanne to tell me about some wonderful man she knew that had recently been widowed. So many dear friends wanted to fix me up over the last 7 years of being alone, but I was fearful and never ready for anything more than a friendship. About a year ago, on one of my regular sunset viewings at the U.S. Express parking lot, I decided that marriage probably would not happen for me, and I was okay with it. I was convinced the Lord would provide all I needed. He had proven himself to be faithful to me over and over again. He has given me wonderful friends and family, and I had a full and productive life.
I started attending the spin class I had heard about, and at one class I began to notice a lady in the class who was very attractive, very fit, and athletic. But most of all, I noticed the way she communicated with others in a very kind manner. She had a great personality and was always smiling. During subsequent classes, I continued to notice her kind and pleasing manner and noticed she wasn't wearing a ring. I assumed she was probably dating someone because of her positive traits. After 7 years of not dating, I thought she might just be the type of person I might like to at least go to dinner with.
Periodically, Joanne, our spin class instructor, would have a party at her home for class participants. After a party in February, which I couldn't attend, she told me she wished I'd been able to come since a guy from class came to the party, and he was a very nice and interesting guy. She told me he was retired and that he worked as a federal probation officer.
I'm not the kind to strike out and go someplace where I don't really know people, but I decided I would go to the spin party when it was mentioned in class. I hoped that the lady I noticed, Debbie, might be there and maybe I could learn more about her, but she didn't come. Sometime later, I was on the bike before class and Debbie came in still dressed in her work clothes. She talked to someone behind me. Again, I noticed her kind personality and that she was dressed professionally and also modestly when she came to exercise. I surmised she might be a decent person of high moral character.
I had not noticed David until one particular night after class when Joanne had us do wall squats. Myself and other class members found a place against the wall to begin our squats when Joanne told me I needed to change with her. I assured her I had plenty of room where I was, but she was insistent and finally came to my spot and had me swap places with her. She placed me next to a handsome bald guy who looked to me like he was in his early 40s. He had a really kind smile, but started saying, "Ouch! How are you doing these so easily?" I giggled at this obviously in-shape young guy struggling with the wall squats. Then he told me how he used wall squats for punishment for his children, to which I again giggled. I don't think I said anything.
Just so you know, women are much better at wall squats than men. I was terrible at them and in great pain and probably had a ridiculous look on my face. I was thinking she's probably laughing at how crazy I look. While struggling and near death, I remember telling Debbie how my children are really good at these, and she just laughed. Sometime later on a Saturday morning, Joanne made an announcement about a dance event and said if anyone was interested in more information to raise their hand and Debbie would give them more information. It is unlike me to raise my hand in that type of setting, but did that day. Debbie told me about a West Coast swing lesson in Red Bank that night. I decided I would go. I've never done anything like this before, but decided I would go and see what happened.
So, when 40-something handsome wall squat guy raised his hand to get information about the West Coast swing dance, I asked him his name. And I assumed he was married or had a girlfriend because he was on a bike next to a woman, but he quickly told me they were not together. I thought he probably wouldn't come because people usually ask about events to be polite, and then they don't follow through. So when my friends Karen and Diane and I arrived and David was there, I was surprised, and I recall saying, "So you did come." I introduced him to my friends and others that I knew who were there. We talked a little, but the instructor rotates everyone, so we danced with different partners during the lesson.
Debbie and her friends told me about a Tuesday night dance lesson in East Ridge, which only cost $5. It turns out that this is less than a mile from my home. So I decided to go to the Tuesday night dance where I saw Debbie and her friends again. We danced a little and talked more. At the end of the evening, before she left, I decided to ask for her number.
Much to my surprise, David appeared at the East Ridge dance, and I noticed he was very kind and engaging to the people. By this time, Joanne had told me of several people she knew that had worked with David, and I noticed that several people at dance seemed to know him. So when he asked for my number, I felt it was safe, given all the connections and the people that seemed to like and respect him. My friend Diane asked if I thought he was interested in me, and I discounted it, saying he's too young, and I also thought he was looking for someone to be his dance informant. The next day, I did receive a text from David. I took the opportunity to tell him of a line dance opportunity that I assumed he would want to know about, since I thought my role was to be his dance informant.
So Friday night, I went way out of my comfort zone and went to a line dance, something I have never done before. I was nervous, but when I arrived and a lady asked how long I had been line dancing, and I said this was my first time, I saw a look of shock come across her face, and she said, "Oh." Line dancing was quite an experience for me, as these people appeared to be professionals. I was always steps behind and often on the wrong foot, but still enjoyed the time with Debbie. I noticed Debbie's friend Karen was giving us space, and therefore I thought maybe, just maybe, she might be interested.
I was quite impressed with David's tenacity during the line dance, as it was quite apparent he had not line danced before. But he continued to try and not give up, and he laughed and seemed not to take himself too seriously. At one point during the evening, we stopped and we talked a bit, and I started thinking maybe he is somewhat interested in me. So I decided to share some hard facts about my past with him. But he didn't seem shocked or fazed. The next morning was Saturday, and we were both at spin class, and after class he asked me if I would like to go to dinner sometime. I said that I would, and he called me a few hours later, and we arranged to meet for dinner that night.
I suggested we meet at Olive Garden and maybe afterward go on a walk downtown. I noticed that Debbie was easy to talk to, and I was incredibly comfortable with her, but I could tell she was a little guarded. She asked questions about my career, and I related my story of how I received a note from a guy named David Croft, which led to my position as a federal probation officer. She looked shocked. She inquired, "David and Debbie Croft?" They've been my neighbors for about 28 years. Then I went on to mention things about others I worked with, and one was Donna Rankin, whom Debbie knew from her church.
At Olive Garden, I noted his kind and gentlemanly treatment toward not only me but others. As we ate, I began my barrage of questions, to which he remained unshaken. I became fascinated with his life story, and if you haven't heard of all the twists and turns of David's life, it's a fascinating story. But he's such a man of humility that you'll have to ask him, or I will need to coax him to get him to share it with you. I was really impressed at how the hard and disappointing things that he had faced did not make him bitter, but better, and how he saw God's hand moving him to where he wanted him to be. He was so fascinating and easy to be around and talk to.
After dinner, we went downtown and walked and talked about our lives more. A short time before I met Debbie, a friend asked what I was looking for in a relationship. I noted many things and traits, and my friend said, "David, that is going to be impossible to find." I began to think Debbie seemed to fit the traits I mentioned to my friend.
As we walked downtown, I laid out my philosophy and boundaries. I told him I had rarely dated in the last 7 years, and I usually only go out with someone once, and then I know it's not going to work. Then I told him I don't date just to date either. He just smiled and told me he felt the same way. We ended a wonderful evening in the same respectful way it began. David made no attempt to hug or kiss or even hold my hand. I felt safe, protected, and most of all respected by him.
We continued to see each other at the Y and text as well. I knew Joanne had started her investigation and hoped I would pass the inspection. After some time had passed, finally, Debbie gave me her address and allowed me to pick her up at her house. We started going out about once a week, and we'd see each other at Tuesday night dances as well. A big step occurred when she asked if I would like to go to Sunday night church with her, and if I did, I would be meeting some of her small group friends that she's been with for about the last 8 years. There I met the girls for the first time and assumed another investigation into my background was underway. Shortly after that, I met her school friends at the end of a school day. As I entered the hallway I had been directed to, one of the teacher friends, I assume was a lookout, shouted, "He's here! He's here!" At which time teachers began stepping out of their rooms from everywhere to inspect me. I felt I had 400 people investigating me. Maybe a little exaggeration, but not too far off.
As time went on, David and I shared more time together and more about our lives. Hard as I tried, I couldn't find anything that was a red flag. And I decided if the FBI investigated him every 5 years as a federal officer and found him to be above board, then I should too. I told David about my times going to U.S. Express to view the sunsets and my talks with the Lord, and we began going there together, and it became a very special place to us. It was at U.S. Express that he first asked if he could hold my hand, and then after quite a while if he could kiss me. When I hesitated to the kiss question, his reply made me really want to kiss him, because he said, "You hesitated, and that means you're not ready, and that's okay." His character continued to shine through, and I continued to feel more cared for and respected than I ever have.
Shortly after, Debbie suggested that before we continued to see each other, that she should meet my children, my sister and her family, and my mom. They all saw how happy I was when I was with Debbie. I knew I had met the woman that I had been looking for and was told didn't exist. At the same time, Debbie's friends were all noticing how she was becoming less guarded and more open, and one asked me, "What have you done with my friend?" Not long after this, I had a nice time meeting Debbie's family.
So now, to fast forward, David formally proposed in 2 stages. It was so perfect. The first phase was at U.S. Express, where we had shared so much and where I had poured my heart out to the Lord. David told me that in order for me to get to this point in our relationship, that I had to trust myself, I had to trust him, and most of all, I had to trust God. He summarized much of what we had learned about each other during our sunset viewing times and spoke such affirming and encouraging words to me. Then he declared that was the end of phase 1. Next, after a premarital counseling session at church, when we were heading to the parking lot because I was starving, he steered me away from the parking lot, and he gently directed me to follow him. We ended up in the sanctuary, where he asked if I knew why we were there.
So during phase 2 in the sanctuary, I asked Debbie if she knew why I had brought her there, and she never replied, but just giggled, just as she did during the wall squats. I proceeded to tell her that since I believed, and we both had acknowledged God's hand in directing us into each other's lives, and we wanted to honor Him, that I wanted to bring her in the sanctuary to ask her if she would be my wife. I pulled a large box out of my pocket, which had been digging into my hip the whole time we sat in the counseling session, and opened it to display the ring, and she said, "Of course," and she continued to giggle. And that's how our story began.
A toast to the groom,
To the groom, to the groom, to the groom.
to the bride.